You need to understand something about Samuel Hartwell. He was the kind of man who made decisions like lightning strikes, sudden, definitive, and impossible to reverse. I watched him that morning in 1849, standing in the dusty yard of his Kansas homestead, loading his stubborn mule, Ezra, with everything he owned. The gold fever had taken hold of him like a fever takes hold of a dying man, completely, desperately, without mercy. Word had come down from California about nuggets big as turkey eggs, rivers running yellow with promise. Samuel had heard the stories in the general store, seen the maps drawn on bar napkins, felt the electric current of possibility crackling through every conversation. His wife, Margaret, stood in the doorway like a ghost already mourning the living. She didn't say much. What was there to say? The decision was made. Their savings were tied up in supplies: pickaxe, pan, beans, hardtack, and enough hope to kill a lesser man. The farm, their life's work, would go to his brother. Everything else fit into those leather saddlebags. California or bust, Samuel muttered, adjusting the pack straps on Ezra's back. The mule's dark eyes watched him with that ancient wisdom that animals possess, the kind that sees through human folly like morning mist. But when Samuel grabbed the lead rope and pulled, Ezra didn't move. Not an inch. Not a muscle. The mule planted his hooves in the Kansas dirt like they were roots reaching down to the center of the earth. "Come on, you stubborn beast!" Samuel yanked harder. Ezra's ears flicked, but his body remained stone still. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the yard where a man's entire future hung in the balance of a mule's will. Margaret watched from the doorway, her face unreadable. She'd been married to Samuel for 12 years, had seen him wrestle calves, break horses, and bend the prairie to his will. But she'd never seen him lose a battle with their old mule. Samuel pulled until his hands burned. He pushed from behind until sweat soaked his shirt. He offered sugar, threatened with a switch, even tried to lift the mule's front legs manually. Ezra remained immovable, like a mountain had sprouted legs and decided to make it stand in their yard. "What in the hell is wrong with you?" Samuel shouted, his voice cracking with frustration. The mule turned his head slightly, fixing Samuel with a look that seemed to say, "The question isn't what's wrong with me, friend. The question is what's wrong with you." Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, hotter. Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the spectacle of Samuel Hartwell, the man who'd never met an obstacle he couldn't overcome, being bested by his own mule. They leaned against fence posts, arms crossed, watching the drama unfold with the quiet fascination of people witnessing something that would become legend. "Maybe the mule knows something you don't," old Pete Morrison called out from the fence line. The crowd chuckled, but Samuel didn't find it funny. His California dream was slipping away with every passing minute, held hostage by 4 stubborn hooves and a will more immovable than stone. Let me tell you what happened next, because this is where the story takes a turn that'll make you question everything you think you know about fate and stubbornness. Samuel sat down in the dirt, defeated. The mule stood there, patient as a preacher, while the Kansas wind whispered through the wheat fields like it was telling secrets to the earth. Margaret finally stepped out of the house, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden porch. "Samuel," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of all the words she'd kept inside. "Come sit with me." He looked up at her, this woman who'd stood by him through droughts and floods, through years when the crops failed and years when they flourished. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time in months. Her hair had more silver than he remembered. Her hands, folded in her apron, bore the calluses of a life spent working alongside him. "I can't, Margaret. I have to get going. The wagon trains are leaving Independence every day. I'm losing time." "Time," she repeated, like the word tasted bitter. "What about the time you're leaving behind?" That's when Samuel noticed things he'd been too busy to see. The way the morning light caught the golden wheat, making it shimmer like water. The sound of their neighbors' children laughing in the distance. The smell of bread baking in Margaret's kitchen, bread he'd planned to abandon for hardtack and beans. But the mule just stood there, watching it all with those knowing eyes. "You want to know what I think?" Margaret walked over to Ezra, running her weathered hand along his neck. "I think this old mule has more sense than both of us combined." Samuel stood up, brushing dirt from his pants. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means maybe there's gold right here that you're too blind to see." The words hit him like a physical blow. Gold. He'd been so focused on the gold in California that he'd forgotten about the gold in Margaret's laugh, the gold in the wheat fields they'd built together, the gold in the simple act of waking up next to someone who'd chosen to love him for 12 years. But pride is a stubborn thing, sometimes more stubborn than mules. Samuel grabbed the rope again, pulled with everything he had. Ezra didn't budge. The crowd was growing, people abandoning their morning chores to watch Samuel Hartwell's war with his own destiny. "I'll buy him from you," called out Jim Baker, the blacksmith. "Give you $50 for that mule." "Not for sale," Samuel snapped, then immediately wondered why he'd said it. If the mule wouldn't move, what good was he? That's when young Tommy Patterson came running down the road, his face flushed with excitement and terror. "Mr. Hartwell, Mr. Hartwell, there's been an accident on the river road." The crowd turned toward the boy, sensing disaster in his voice. Tommy bent over, catching his breath, then looked up with eyes wide as saucers. "The California wagon train. The one that left yesterday morning. They tried to cross Miller's Creek after the rain, and the bridge gave way. 3 wagons went in. People are hurt, Mr. Hartwell. Bad hurt." The silence that followed was deafening. Samuel felt the blood drain from his face. That was the train he'd planned to join. Would have joined, if not for one stubborn mule. Margaret's hand found his shoulder. "Samuel," she whispered, and her voice carried all the weight of what might have been. "Listen to me now, because this is where the story becomes something more than a tale about a man and his mule. This is where it becomes a story about the thin line between fate and chance, between what we think we want and what we actually need." Samuel stood there in his yard, surrounded by neighbors and loaded saddlebags, staring at young Tommy Patterson like the boy had just delivered news from another world. The California wagon train, his wagon train, was scattered across Miller's Creek like broken dreams. "How many?" Samuel's voice was barely a whisper. 3 dead, sir. More injured. The Hendersons' little girl is missing, swept downstream." Without thinking, Samuel dropped Ezra's lead rope and ran toward the house. But before he could reach the porch, he stopped, turned around, looked at the mule. Ezra was moving. Not toward the road. Not toward California. The mule was walking, calm as Sunday morning, toward the barn. Like he'd been waiting for this moment all along. "Where are you going?" Samuel called after him, but his voice lacked the anger from before. Something had shifted in the world. Some invisible weight had been lifted. Margaret was already moving, gathering medical supplies from the house. "We need to get to the creek," she said. "Sarah Henderson helped me when I was sick last winter. I won't let her lose her daughter." Samuel looked at his packed saddlebags, at the pickaxe and gold pan that had seemed so important an hour ago. Then he looked at his wife, this woman who ran toward disaster while he'd been running toward dreams. "The mule," he said, understanding flooding through him like creek water. He knew. "Animals know things," Margaret said, securing bandages in her bag. "They feel storms coming, earthquakes, trouble. Maybe they feel foolishness too." Samuel began unpacking Ezra's saddlebags, his hands working automatically while his mind reeled. Every item he pulled out, the mining equipment, the trail food, the map with the route to California marked in red ink, felt like artifacts from another man's life. "Help me get him hitched to the wagon," he said. "We're going to need him to pull the injured back to town." For the first time that day, Ezra moved eagerly, as if he'd been waiting for this purpose all along. They worked together, Samuel and Margaret, with the practiced efficiency of people who'd built a life side by side. The mule stood patient while they hitched him to the wagon, loading it with blankets, medical supplies, rope. All the neighbors pitched in, the same neighbors who'd come to watch Samuel's humiliation now united in emergency. When they reached Miller's Creek, the scene was worse than Tommy had described. The bridge was completely gone, swept away by the flash flood. Wagons were scattered along the banks, some overturned, others half submerged. People wandered around in a daze, calling names, searching for loved ones. Samuel found himself in the water before he realized he'd moved, diving under the swift current to search for the Henderson girl. His gold-seeking hands, the same hands that had packed for California, now groped through muddy water for something far more precious than nuggets. He found her clinging to a branch 20 yards downstream, barely conscious but alive. When he lifted her from the water, she was light as a feather, fragile as spun glass. "I've got you," he whispered, carrying her to shore. "I've got you." Margaret was there with blankets, with warm tea, with the kind of competence that comes from years of prairie life. Other neighbors were pulling people from the wreckage, using Samuel's wagon to transport the injured to the doctor in town. But it was Ezra who became the hero of the day. The mule worked tirelessly, pulling load after load of injured people, never balking, never complaining. As if this saving of lives, was what he'd been preparing for all along. Being cared for by the doctor. The dead were laid out respectfully, awaiting burial. The survivors were housed with families throughout the area, including the Hendersons, who were staying with Samuel and Margaret until they could decide what to do next. Samuel sat on his porch, watching the sun set over the wheat fields. The same fields he'd been ready to abandon 12 hours ago. Margaret brought him coffee, settling beside him on the wooden step. "You saved lives today," she said quietly. "The mule saved lives," Samuel corrected. "I was just too stubborn to listen." Little Sarah Henderson came out of the house, wrapped in one of Margaret's quilts. She was pale but alive, and she walked straight to Samuel with the directness that only children possess. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, her voice small but clear, "Mama says you pulled me out of the water." "I did. She says if you hadn't been here, I would have died." Samuel looked down at this child, this life that had been preserved because a mule refused to move. "Maybe," he said, "but I almost wasn't here. I was planning to leave for California this morning." "Why didn't you?" He glanced over at Ezra, who was grazing peacefully in the pasture, looking like any ordinary mule. "Because sometimes the best gold is the kind you can't put in a pan." Sarah didn't understand. She was too young, but she smiled anyway and went back inside to her parents. Margaret took Samuel's hand. "What now?" "Now we plant the winter wheat," he said. "We fix the fence by the south pasture. We live." "And California?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "California will always be there," he said finally. "But this moment, this place, this life, it's only here once." Over the following weeks, Samuel learned the rest of the story. The California wagon train had been rushing to beat the weather, taking risks they shouldn't have taken. The bridge had been weakened by recent rains, but the wagon master had decided to cross anyway. 3 families had lost everything, including their lives, chasing dreams that glittered like fool's gold. Samuel kept his mining equipment, but he used it differently now. He taught the neighborhood boys how to pan for gold in the creek, not because there was any real gold there, but because they loved the search. He told them stories about prospectors and adventures, but he always ended with the same lesson. The best treasure is usually right under your nose. The mule lived for 12 more years, becoming something of a local legend. People would bring their animals to Samuel when they acted strangely, believing that he had a special understanding of animal wisdom. He never claimed any special power, but he always listened carefully to what the animals were trying to say. Margaret lived to be 83, long enough to see their farm become one of the most prosperous in the county. She never once mentioned California, never asked what might have been. She'd married a man who'd learned to distinguish between wandering and journeying, between dreams and visions. And Samuel? He lived to be 91, long enough to see the 20th century arrive with its automobiles and electricity. He'd tell this story to his grandchildren, always ending the same way. Sometimes the thing that stops you from getting what you want is the very thing that gives you what you need. They say that on quiet Kansas mornings, when the wheat fields shimmer gold in the sunrise, you can still see an old mule standing in a farmyard, planted like a tree, refusing to move. Refusing to let dreams become disasters. Refusing to let a good man chase fool's gold when real gold was growing in his own backyard. I ask you now, my friend, what mule is standing in your yard today? What stubborn force is keeping you from chasing after something that might destroy you? Sometimes the thing that seems like an obstacle is actually salvation wearing work clothes. Sometimes the voice of wisdom speaks through the most unexpected messengers. Listen carefully. The universe might be trying to tell you something through the silence of a creature who knows better than to move when moving would mean losing everything that truly matters. Let me tell you about a man who packed his entire life into saddlebags, ready to chase the California dream, only to discover that sometimes the universe speaks through the stubborn heart of a mule. Listen closely to this story, my friend. It's about the moment when everything you think you want collides with what you truly need. This tale will change how you see destiny itself.